Cinematic mode is one of the new features that Apple talked about a lot during the iPhone 13 keynote. If you're familiar with portrait video on an Android phone, well, that's basically what it is. While shooting in cinematic mode, the iPhone will attempt to blur the background with software and focus on whatever you choose in the foreground. The question is it any good? Portrait video is not a new thing. I mean, many Samsung phones have had it for years, and I've neglected to use it very much because it wasn't very good. So why make an entire video on Apple's version? Well, to be honest, it is the best implementation of a portrait video mode that we've seen yet. It definitely has some flaws, which we're gonna get into, but if you use it in the right way, it has great potential for certain applications. The first way I can see people using cinematic mode is for a vlog style video. It can actually be used on the front-facing camera as well as the rear, so it's easy enough to reframe your shot. I shot this in a wooded area on purpose. The trees in the background typically make it very difficult for the software to discern what is foreground and what is the background. At first glance, it actually looks pretty good, but if you start pixel peeping and looking for problems, you're going to find them. For one, the edges of my hair blowing in the wind get blurred out. It also has a lot of trouble with the inside of my glasses when I turn my head. Either way, I think if I was watching this on a phone and I wasn't actively looking for problems, I wouldn't have noticed, but these are the things that you should come to expect when you're using cinematic mode. I also just want to mention how good the stabilization is in this mode. I'm not trying to hold this heavy 13 Pro Max steady, and the stabilization is so good that I wouldn't even think to bother using a gimbal to stabilize it further. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret though. If you have a selfie stick and an Apple Watch, you can get much better vlog style video by flipping the phone around and using the Apple Watch as a miniature on-camera monitor. The 1x sensor on the Pro and Pro Max models this year is insanely good, and you can actually get a lot of natural background blur from the camera without any software trickery. But if you did want a lot more background blur, you could do the same thing with the rear cameras in cinematic mode. I'd advise you to use a selfie stick as I did here though, because the 1x camera on the rear is a little too close otherwise. Cinematic mode will attempt to track a subject as it moves away or gets closer to the camera. I look like a bit of a dork wearing all my rain gear here, but I think it does a pretty darn good job. But not every shot will end up looking perfect. In shots like this, you can clearly see it has trouble with the background between my legs. As I walk closer to the camera, it catches me and blurs out the background, but there are portions of my head and body that are blurred when they really shouldn't be. Now, because this is a software-based trick, we can actually fix some of that later, and I'll go into how to do some of that as well as some best practices on how to actually shoot with the cinematic mode a little bit later in this video. Oh, by the way, this video isn't sponsored, but if you want to support the channel, you could buy one of my new shirts that I just released. I'll have a link in the video description below if you're interested. Cinematic mode also works on pets. This one surprised me a little. It ended up performing a lot better than I was expecting. There are some minor errors here and there around Ash's whiskers, but for the most part, the software did an excellent job at figuring out what should be blurred and what shouldn't be. It works on static objects too. Sometimes you'll have to tap and focus on them, but for the most part, the phone knows exactly what it should be blurring and what it shouldn't be. Depending on the size of the object, you might want to consider putting the camera really close to the subject that you're trying to shoot and just use the natural depth of field generated by the camera, especially if you have the Pro Max and you can take advantage of that longer focal length on the telephoto. So there are some limitations of the cinematic mode other than the fact that it can mess up on the edges of some things. For one, it shoots at a maximum resolution of 1080p and it's locked to 30 FPS. You can't use the ultra wide with this mode either, although the Pro and Pro Max models can use the 3x telephoto. But despite those limitations, I think the cinematic mode has great potential for one thing in particular: mobile video. On platforms like Instagram, TikTok, or even Twitter, where the vast majority of people will be on their phone, this mode will look excellent. It's fairly difficult to spot the errors that cinematic mode makes on something as small as a phone screen, even if you're looking for them. So let's talk about how to improve the video from the cinematic mode. One of the cool things about this mode is that you can actually edit it after it's shot. If you go into your gallery and hit edit up in the top right hand corner, you can do things like change the amount of background blur or alter where the focus is being directed. If the phone decided to focus on something else during the video, you can just scrub to that place on the timeline and tap on what you want want it in focus. The software will then readjust and change where the background blur is being placed. I personally think that having too much background blur looks a little fake and overprocessed, so for most of my cinematic mode shots, I'll dial the fake aperture back to an f5.6 or more. You can do that by tapping this little button in the top left. This also helps with errors and makes them a little bit more difficult to spot since it is less aggressive with the blurring. The cinematic mode is going to work best when you're filming a subject against a contrasting background. The light gray wall behind me contrasts my dark hair and my black shirt, so it has an easier time picking out what is the foreground and what is the background. But if I shoot my silver colored Bose 700s against that wall, the software kind of has no idea what to do. Try and avoid that wherever possible. So if your intent is to post your video on something like YouTube, where there are going to be a lot of people viewing it on a computer monitor or something even bigger like a TV, I'd advise you not to use the cinematic mode. The resolution is a big step down from the 4K video that the iPhone 13s can shoot normally, and the errors will be a lot easier to spot on a larger screen. But if all you're gonna do is post them on places like Instagram or TikTok where it'll be viewed by people on their phones and tablets, cinematic mode is gonna look awesome. Hope you liked the video, thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.